Hello, everyone, and welcome to our annual panel discussion on career paths in STEM. My name is Aaron Geller. I'm the director of our NSF-funded Research Experiences for Undergraduates program here at Northwestern in our CIERA Astrophysics Center. We have a really great panel lined up today, and I really want to thank our panelists right at the start for being with us. And also on Zoom, we have undergraduate student researchers from Northwestern and from all around the country, universities, different REU programs. So really excited to have everyone with us today. Almost 100 people with us right now, and maybe more will be joining us in a few minutes. We're all looking forward to a really great discussion. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Cliff. Cliff is the co-director of our REU program here at Northwestern, and he'll introduce the panelists and get the discussion started. So Cliff, please take it away.
Thanks, Aaron. Again, my name is Cliff Johnson. Thank you all for joining us. Our career panels are kind of a highlight of every year, really being able to showcase the kind of broad range of paths that folks who have done graduate work in physics and astronomy and the careers that they can have gone into. Actually, without me doing the full introductions, I will kind of go around and let's meet our four panelists. So let's get started with Gail Ratliff.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. My name is Gail Ratliff, and I am an assistant professor of instruction at Northwestern University in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I am a high energy astrophysicist by training. I conducted research with, it's a long acronym, the Very Energetic Radiation Imaging Telescope Array System. I'm going to refer to it as VERITAS for my PhD work, and also as a postdoctoral researcher where I work there, and also with Aaron at the Adler Planetarium. I also have a degree in engineering. I have a very interesting path. I think I saw some MITs in the chat and a lot of schools in Boston, but I actually have a master's from MIT, and I worked as a research engineer there also in their Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. In my current position at Northwestern, though, I am working primarily on educational initiatives. Specifically, I work on inclusive classroom practices, thinking about ways to make physics education, and more broadly speaking, STEM education, more inclusive to all the students that we're welcoming at Northwestern. So that's primarily my focus these days at Northwestern.
Great, thanks, Gail. Next, let's hear from Phil Rosenfield.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. It's really great to be here. I'm Phil Rosenfield. I am a research program manager at Microsoft Research in New England, and it's industrial research lab for Microsoft. It's kind of the academic wing of Microsoft, and I can talk more about that in a bit. Before I was at Microsoft Research, I was a NSF postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. I did a postdoc in Padua University before that, and I had a PhD from the University of Washington. I studied stellar evolution and stellar populations, and I saw a lot of Boston University popping through the chat, and that's where I did my undergrad. So hi, LPU folks. But no, very happy to be here and to share my experiences with you all.
Great, thanks, Phil. Next up, let's hear from Laura Sampson.
Hi, I am currently a bioinformatics scientist at a proteomics company here in Denver, which is a little bit of a different route than some other folks have gone with their physics degrees. I did my undergraduate at CU Boulder in physics, and then got a PhD in physics as well at Montana State University, studying gravitational wave astronomy. So I was a member of the LIGO collaboration and the NanoGrav collaboration. I then did a postdoc at CIERA, still doing gravitational wave research. And then I shifted in a second postdoc to studying infectious disease dynamics, which we've all become super familiar with over the last year. And it was from that postdoc and sort of connections I made there that I moved into the bioinformatics statistics world. And that's what I'm doing now.
Great, thanks, Laura. And now, Farah Munshi.
Hey guys, it's really great to be here and to sort of virtually meet all of you. I guess I'm the most traditional path here. I did my undergrad at Berkeley, majoring in astronomy, and then I went on almost directly to a PhD in astronomy at the University of Washington. After that, I did my rounds of postdocs, one at University of Oklahoma, one at Vanderbilt, after which I became an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma, where I am now.
Great. So very excited for these 4 panelists to have joined us. So we will get into questions almost right away. So if folks have things on your mind and would like to share via voice, feel free to use the raised hand option, or if you prefer, also typing that question into chat. And so while you all are kind of formulating those initial questions, I'm actually going to ask my own, take the moderator's preference here, and ask each of our 4 panelists. We'll kind of just go in the same order as the introduction. So starting with Gail, of if there was anything kind of knowing where you are now that you could have done to kind of prepare for that career and that you wish you would have done, what would that be? And so we'll start with Gail.
Thank you, Cliff. That's a great question. You may not like the way I'm answering this because, well, there are always things that you wish you could take back or do again. You all will see in your research and in your career. But I'm going to speak a little bit more broadly. Probably as I look back on my career, the things that I wish I could do over were things related to the fact that it took me a while to embrace being different in the field of physics. And so it took me a really long time to as a researcher to understand that differences in opinion, background, expertise is actually a good thing. So if I could do over my career again, I would probably be more comfortable with that a little bit sooner. It took me, I feel like, a little bit too long as I navigated my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD to see that as a positive thing and to embrace that and kind of use that to my advantage. Okay, so a very broad, general way to answer that question.
Yeah, sure. How about Phil?
Sure. So, yeah, when I think back on what I wish I had prepared for my current role, I kind of want to, I don't think there are any kind of hard skills or that I really, everything that I've learned up until the point I got it, I use. I mean, okay, I'm not, solving differential equations every day anymore, but beyond that, even talking to researchers, all of my research experience comes through it. And it's being in a kind of an academic position, it's very similar. I'm also, I should have mentioned it in the last question, I'm also coordinating our undergraduate research intern program for Microsoft Research. So we have one too. It's probably different in research topic, but I think my first instinct to answer to this was working and acting with intention. And that's something that I had to really teach myself on the go, is rather than just drinking from the fire hose and doing what's next, I needed to really, enabling other people to do their work. I needed to pick intentionally what I wanted to work on, and what are the 3 best things I can do today, sort of thing, and how can I communicate the best with this person? Where is this person coming from, and how can I best communicate with them? Things like that, and bringing intentionality to every part of my work was probably the biggest learning curve I had. I think I absolutely needed it before I got this position. It just wasn't obvious to me yet. So I think that's my answer.
Yeah, no, I really feel like that applies to my life too. How about from Laura?
So I have maybe a less profound but slightly more concrete thing that I wish I had done, which is get more formal training in statistics. So there's a lot of sort of math skills that you learn through osmosis in your physics or astronomy background, and it's good to learn how to learn, but I've had to pick up a lot of vocabulary describing different kinds of tests and that sort of thing that if I had taken an undergrad stats class, I would know already. And that's a simple thing that people can do.
Yeah, great. And Farah.
This is a hard one for me to answer, but I think I'm going to go with learning how to be more assertive with my opinions and my knowledge. I spent a lot of time thinking that just because someone was more senior definitely meant that they knew more than I did. regardless of whether they were in my field or not. And so when I had a thought or an opinion or something that disagreed with what someone said, I would always defer because of seniority. But seniority doesn't mean anything. You know, usually 99% of the time, you are the expert in your own work. You are the expert in the solution you're presenting. You are the expert in the problem you are trying to solve. And remembering that and remembering that you are the expert in the room and asserting that is something that I should have done a whole lot sooner than I actually did, because that manifests itself in so many different ways. It manifests itself in the way you write applications. It manifests itself in the way that you interview. It manifests itself in the way that you give talks. And it manifests itself in the way that you present yourself in a classroom if you are teaching. And so I think it took me far too long to be able to realize that. And I wish that someone had shaken that knowledge into me a lot sooner. And so I think I'm going to go with that one.
Good. Knowledge shaking is what we're here for today. So everyone, please don't be shy about sharing particular questions or raising your hand if you'd like to be called on here. I actually liked Sarah Hall's question here to kind of kick us off. And so we won't do round robin. Panelists, please feel free to kind of speak up if you'd like to address this. But can you walk us through a day in your life at work? And kind of, so you've talked a little bit about the positions you're in, but what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? Anyone want to kick us off, panelists?
Sure. So the big difference in my day-to-day life now from when I was an academic is the schedule is very structured on projects. So maybe I'll walk you through sort of a week, which is like the chunk of time that we look at. So we meet as a team once every week, and everybody discusses exactly what they're planning to get done that week and how long it's going to take. And so in the morning, I'll pull up my sort of task list and see, okay, what did I say I was going to get done? What can I work on today? I'll have meetings interspersed, but the big difference for me is that there's very clearly defined deadlines and very clearly defined projects. So I always know exactly what I'm going to be working on for the next few days. So I also will have meetings with different stakeholders. So what my company does is build predictive models for clinical outcomes. So we have things like a blood test to tell you what your VO2 max is or what your risk of a heart attack in 4 years is. So I have a lot of meetings with like marketing teams and clinical teams and lots of collaborators that I wouldn't have ever interacted with anyone like that before being in this job. So I'd say that it's very structured and very clear what the expectations are. And there are probably a lot more meetings than there used to be in my life.
How about Phil? Kind of in contrast to maybe the academic schedule that maybe even as an RU student, you've seen your advisor or someone else participate in. Do you see any kind of differences in your kind of outside of academia position now?
Yeah, so yeah, my day-to-day changes quite often. I mean, working from home, it looks the same, but it changes quite a bit. I work on a few different projects and initiatives. I mean, I would call the and some of them have different people who are involved. So I'm working, for example, on a biomedical machine learning project with a startup researchers. It's kind of academic focused. We're working on papers and research that could end up in a clinic someday, perhaps. So there's a lot of meetings that we have to kind of have our two different groups work together. And then since it's also part of Microsoft, there's some cloud-based products that we're using. And so what some of the things I do is well, we're using it this way. Maybe that's something that you guys want to try. So I'm kind of playing this like a kind of a triangle communication bit where I'm talking a bit with product teams, I'm talking a bit with external folks, and then coordinating everything together. So that can be several, could be a span of several days, but sometimes those meetings all line up. Also, we have colloquia here. We've got a lot of lunch meetings with talks too. So a lot of visiting researchers coming in, interns giving talks. So part of the day is, doing that and watching those and interacting with those sorts of things. And so, yeah, I think that, so the day-to-day is a bit more structured. And I don't know, I kind of have to book focused time. So basically blackout calendar so I can actually get into a deeper workflow, which I would never had to have done as a postdoc, where it's basically, that's all the time, at least for my postdoc, my postdocs anyway.
Yeah. Gaylor Farrat, maybe anything that students here would find unexpected about your day-to-day, or that maybe you didn't expect going into your academic positions?
Not much. I would just add that with academic position, at least I feel this way, there's no day is like the rest. I feel like depending on the time of the year, week to week, it varies quite a bit. So like when the quarter's going on at Northwestern, it's very hectic. You're working all the time. I'm teaching a lot, but the summers are really nice because they give you the opportunity to like, now I'm processing a bunch of data I took this year. And so there are ebbs and flows to it. So I actually think that's a positive thing about academia.
So I would say that I think one of the most surprising things about being faculty at kind of a research intensive institution is how much project management is involved in my day-to-day. So not only are you managing the projects that you yourself are working on, but you're managing the projects of all your PhD students, you're managing the projects of your undergrad students, you're managing the service work that you're doing, whether it be designing new admissions processes or hell, putting together colloquium, right? Because getting people to suggest speakers is like herding cats. And so part of what I mean by project management is that time management of figuring out how to carve out time for all the people you are responsible for all the commitments you've made, and then also for yourself in terms of the research that you want to get done to remain research active. And then to boot, you have to figure out where you're getting the money to do all of that. And so the amount of grant writing, I think, cannot be stressed anymore. And to be fair, you've caught me at a particularly grumpy grant writing time. I have a big one due, less than a week from today, so I'm a little bit grumpy. But to be fair, it's pretty much year round. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to feed my grad students, right? I want to make sure that I have funding for them to do the projects that they're excited to do, the projects that will help them reach the career goals that they want. And so, there's a short-term planning of how I'm going to help them make progress today, and then the long-term planning of how am I going to get them to money to make the progress to the PhD, or if you're an undergrad, be able to pay you over the summer so then you can have a paper when you're applying to graduate school. And so, I had big ideas of like, when you become faculty, you sit at your beautiful desk and you do all your favorite research projects. And I spend a surprisingly little amount of time on my own research projects. And so I think that is very surprising to a lot of people. And it's definitely something that we're not trained in our previous stages to be able to do. We're kind of just thrown into this fire. And it's like, oh God, what do I do? And so, yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thanks all for sharing. How about shifting gears a little bit to a question from Gretchen Hibbert. Asking the panelists, have you dealt with imposter syndrome, downplaying your skills and contributions, and how have you combated that kind of mindset?
So I'm going to jump in first here. Sorry. I want to make sure that there is clarification between feeling imposter syndrome and being gaslit for your identity. So I think a lot of women, people of color, and underserved minorities in physics and astronomy mistake microaggressions and actual aggressions for imposter syndrome. So they're blaming themselves for something that their department and the structure of academia is actually doing to them. And so I think it's important to recognize that early because this ties into then being assertive, right? So when you're feeling those questions of yourself, it's important to sit back and say, is this something that I'm feeling because of what someone is telling me? Or is this something that I'm feeling because it's imposter syndrome? And I think that distinction is something that I did not make early enough. So I couldn't assert for myself in the way that I needed to assert for myself as someone who's not white and, you know, a woman in a very male dominated field. In particular, if you're in a physics department, it tends to be even worse than in an astronomy department. And so I really want to jump in and make sure that when you have those feelings, you sit back and maybe talk it through with a mentor. You know, is this imposter syndrome, or is this something structural that's happening to me that needs to be fixed? But in terms of combating imposter syndrome, there are a lot of resources that are out there in terms of workshops that are available, reading that you can do, and I'm happy to give Erin or Cliff some of that stuff. I run for our REU and for our first year grad students an imposter syndrome workshop, and I'm happy to share that material with you guys.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Farah. Any of the other panelists wanted to add to that answer?
I think I alluded to this in my introduction, but I'm very underrepresented in the field of physics. I'm an African-American woman. So this is something I've dealt with my entire career. And Farah, thank you so much for putting that so nicely. I appreciate that and agree. My experience in the field has been one, how do I get over imposter syndrome? So I think that is very sage advice. I do think it is worth taking a step back and saying what are causing these feelings for sure. But for me, I mean, when I joined Veritas, I felt very different. And that feeling of being different stuck with me throughout that because I was different. It took me a little time to say, you know, that's okay. Like, you're always going to be different. Your culture is different, like your background's different, and that's okay, and embracing that. But by the end of my PhD program, I will share that I really felt like I was part of this huge collaboration of physicists, and it transcended some of these boundaries that I had always felt in graduate school. And I felt that by becoming good at what I did, becoming the expert, right, in my field and what I was doing, that felt me be very connected. Like I feel much more connected to the field of physics because my love of physics and my love of my research, and that helped me get through it, feeling that connection. But I do think it is important. So I appreciate Farah saying that it is important to highlight the fact that there's so many other factors that go into being underrepresented in these departments. And sometimes we talk about imposter syndrome as this blanket thing where there's subtleties there. So that's it. Yeah.
No, thanks for sharing. Changing gears a little bit again. So a question here from Rachel Herr and Naomi Schechter. While going through the PhD program, did you imagine you'd end up doing something like you are doing now? And if not, what made you change your path? And in that process of making that change, do you have any advice for people as they might encounter that same point and that kind of same inflection point in their career? Maybe Phil or Laura?
Sure, I can start. So no, I had no idea I would be working as a biologist when I was doing my PhD in physics. The thing that made it really clear to me that I needed to change paths was that I was a postdoc at Northwestern when LIGO made the first detection of gravitational waves, and I wasn't excited. So I knew that I couldn't dedicate the rest of my life to studying that work. And at that point, I started looking around for other things I could do. And because I had been doing so much just data analysis, really, I was doing parameter estimation and model selection for LIGO. So that translated very well to other work. It was relatively easy for me to find something to shift into. But yeah, it was realizing if you want to be an academic, you have to want to do it because you're really passionate about your research. And if you're not, that's okay. There's no problem. There's lots of other jobs you can do, but it's better to figure that out earlier than later.
I could take it from there too. For me, when I was doing my PhD, I I certainly wanted to be an academic, but I just didn't believe that there was enough roles and that I was gonna make enough life sacrifices to do it. So I thought that the only option besides what I was doing was a data scientist role. And one of the things that I really liked about academia was being able to do the non-research stuff like teaching. So that's what kind of kept me in it for a long time. And then, 8 years went by and I wasn't teaching. And so I kind of got a little tired of that. So I was prepared. I did small things to kind of have one foot in both camps, in the data science camp. Back in the age that I was starting my PhD, you could choose between IDL and Python, and it wasn't a crazy decision which one you wanted to do. And I chose Python because I thought that would have been more marketable later on, for example. So I was making decisions that I thought would kind of span both lands like that. But I also got the opportunity of doing a PhD internship at Microsoft Research, I think because of the proximity of the University of Washington and my involvement with the planetarium and a project that Microsoft Research was doing with the Adler Planetarium at the time made it like just so happened to be there. And I just kind of saw what research could be like elsewhere. I decided to kind of keep those job pages open at every career point that I was at. One of the ways I really knew that I was leaving academia was I applied to 2 faculty positions rather than a ton, because I just didn't want to move my family all over the place. And I didn't want to, I wanted to choose where I got to work. I wanted to make these kind of choices about my time and where I wanted to be and have that mobility. So I don't know if there's a second part to that question, but that's kind of where I was steering from the PhD point.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Bill. Gaylor, Farah, anything to add?
I didn't think that I would be a professor or instructor for sure. I thought I was just going to be purely in research when I first got my PhD. And I got into education kind of as a fluke. I took an adjunct professor position at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And there may be others on the panel who've adjuncted before, but you basically do it for free. It's one of those things that you do for extra money. The pay is like terrible. But I discovered I loved it so much because, I basically did it for a couple of years for free and then got and shifted gears and realized that I could leave some of the research that I was doing. Your research is kind of like your baby. And so it's really hard to like step away when you've been doing so much. And then became really interested and really passionate about the educational initiative. So in a nutshell, I kind of got into the education route as a fluke. I think there was a question actually in the chat about going into physics education and physics education research. And I will just add, there are programs for that. You can actually do a PhD where you write a dissertation on this, and I did not. But at the same time, I've also been on search committees, and we've had this conversation that just doing programs or getting certificates are weighted pretty highly because it is so much of a niche field as the question in this chat. That's a really, really good question. My advice for people who think they might want to teach is get experience in it, TA if you can, tutor if you can, because it's one of those things that I think there's a lot of hands-on experience that you should get. And that practical skills really comes in when they put you in front of a class with 200 students or what have you, like we have at Northwestern.
Great. Actually, so maybe even kind of going along with Gail's mention of the specialization and interest in physics education, maybe backing up to like when you were thinking about doing your PhD, how did you end up specializing in the research you did for your PhD, and how did you narrow down from your interests? Or maybe you could dismiss that kind of framing of the question altogether, and how did you end up getting interested in things and deciding to basically, how did you decide to be intentional about the things that you are intentional and interested in doing now? Maybe Farah, we haven't heard from you.
So I would say that it was less about the research and more about the person. Being able to work with someone all the way to a PhD is a long time commitment. It is hard. Your life will throw things at you. The program will throw things at you. There's a lot of rejection that goes along with being in an academic path. And so you want to be working with someone that supports you, that values your identity as a human being and who you are outside of the project that you were doing with them, and who you are comfortable saying, step off, I'm having life issues, or, I was not productive this week. You need to be able to have that level of comfort to be able to be a good researcher. My mantra in life for everything is happy people do good work. And so, your choices in grad school have to be the things that make you happy. Otherwise, it's not worth it. There's no part of grad school that's worth it if you are not feeling some sort of happiness. And so, a large part of being happy in grad school is finding a person that you can have that type of PhD student relationship with, that's open, that, each person values each other in both ways, that the group is supportive, that there's no bullying, and all of that stuff, I think is far more important than the research that you end up doing. For me, as a personal anecdote, the reason I felt so comfortable in the research group that I ended up in was because of the large number of women, and the fact that we still to this day, every 2 weeks, meet all the women in the collaboration and support each other. We talk about science, we talk about issues that we're having inside and outside of the collaboration. We start projects with each other. We coach each other on interviewing, on writing. We share writing with each other. It's every 2 weeks, and it's been over 10 years. And without that, I wouldn't be here today. And so that is what got me interested in what I was doing, because I realized that these people were people that cared about me. And so the work that I would do would come naturally with that support.
Any of the other panelists want to add to, that choice of how you chose the PhD, or
I mean, I'll just agree that you want to find an environment in grad school that's going to make you happy. So I decided I wanted to go to Montana, and then saw what research was being done there. I thought gravity was cool, so I did that. So it doesn't have to be a super drawn out process, but yeah, you need to find an environment that you're going to like, or you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, just real quick, my strategy, I don't know how great this is, right? But my strategy was to find a place that I liked a lot of the work that was going on there. So when I got there, I could choose or even do a rotation. And I don't think I kind of worked with, I worked with 2 people, but I kind of honed in on who I wanted to work with pretty quickly. But I felt comfort knowing that there's plenty of people I could work on if I changed my mind or changed my interest. And one of the other contending grad school I got into, I was really going to go there just to work with one person. In retrospect, that would have worked out too. But there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing a lot of keeping doors open, kind of looking beyond just what the title of your possible dissertation is going to be. Keeping those kind of other aspects of life kind of in view. So maybe on a related note, question about kind of like work-life balance. And I think, many of you have already kind of touched on the points of, that for the success for you, it was about, finding a way to be happy, both like in the work that you were doing, but also, outside of work. And that maybe that drove some of your decision making over time. But maybe do any of the panelists have some kind of explicit advice, maybe like for prospective PhD students, or in other kind of phases, about how to kind of keep that work-life balance in check, or any strategies that might be helpful?
I can say, set your boundaries. You are an adult. when you start grad school, and you are absolutely 100% allowed to set your boundaries. And part of choosing the right group and the right PhD advisors is someone that respects those boundaries. And so, it's a little bit harder initially when you're TAing and taking classes, because, classes can have homework sets and then you're doing them late into the night. So I definitely wasn't that good, when classes was going on, but kind of later on when it was just research, right? You can set your boundaries, you can set your hours, and just, as Phil said, be intentional with the time that you're working. There is no reason that this has to be an 80-hour job. There's absolutely no reason. If you take the time that you're willing to work and are intentional with it, you will get to that PhD and you will be successful. But you have to stick to those boundaries because academia will try to gnaw away at them and chip away at them. And if you don't keep them strong, and they will crumble, and then that will end up at that 80 hours a week that nobody wants. So I think it's very important to go in with some idea of what your boundaries are.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree with that. And I think that it's really healthy if you can get yourself to view your graduate school as a job and not an identity. A lot of people get really, really wrapped up in, oh, I didn't do well in this class, so that means I'm a bad person, or I'm not putting in 80 hours a week and this other student is. No, it's your employment. And especially once you're done with classes, that's a little different because you do have to get the homework done, and sometimes that can take excess time. But once you're a researcher, it really is your job, and that can be a good way to think about what the boundaries should be.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to share a mistake that I made, because sometimes sharing mistakes are helpful. The person I worked with did not have a work-life balance that I could discern. And I thought that meant I couldn't have one. And that was such a stupid mistake. If you're working with somebody who makes those choices, that doesn't mean you have to. And also it doesn't mean that they really don't. Some people, the nice thing about academia is that you set your hours. It's flexible. If you work from 7 to 9, the people I would work with worked from 7 to 9, but found out later that's because it was after bedtime and that was the 2 hours they had, because the other 2 hours they were spending with their kids, for example. And so if you get an email late at night, that doesn't mean that that person works 24 hours. That just means they don't work the same hours as you. And you should feel no obligation to reply to an email, to work that way, and to figure out how do you want to work? How do you best work? I mean, you're in a position where you can say, hey, you know what? I'm an early riser and I work best in the mornings, and then do that. And so it's really, there's a lot of metacognition involved in all of this, in setting that up. But work-life balance is something that a lot of places, industry and academia, just play lip service to. And so don't allow that. Take a vacation when you're a grad student. Just tell people you're gone for the period you're gone, and watch what happens. You'll be a grad student when you come back, and you'll be successful. It'll be fine, and actually you'll be more efficient. There's tons of research that shows that 80-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks are unproductive. They're not productive. That's not how your mind works best. That's not where the creativity comes from. Creativity comes from rest, and so you need to make sure that you do all that and you're taking care of yourself that way. So those are things I would add to.
I know, it's great advice. A little bit of a deeper question here. How do you deal with failure, and how do you keep yourself motivated despite possible stumbles along the way? And maybe if any of the panelists have any anecdotes or stories from their kind of career path that maybe kind of fits that bill, could be an interesting story to share with the students. Gail, we haven't heard from you. Is it okay if I put you on the spot?
No, please go right ahead. It depends on what you mean by failure. I think that inherent in research is this that you're going to make mistakes. I mean, you're not going to get the right answer. So I think that's number one, is particularly in research. And so it's not necessarily a failure if you get something wrong. Sometimes like my work with MIT, once in a while I have a friend who's an engineer who will say, oh, we've done better than your paper. And I'm like, yeah, of course, I wrote that, so long ago. Hopefully you all have done better than that, so it's a good thing. We got some of it wrong, but that's the point. That's the way that science builds. And a lot of my classes, I try to give a historical perspective too, because I think there's this myth that physicists just sit down and get all the answers. And so it's interesting, even in teaching my introductory physics classes, one of the things that I do just to drive this home is that, progress happened over decades, over centuries, really, for a lot of these things. And this is the way that science and physics is done. And so you're going to make mistakes. You're going to backtrack. There are people who are going to improve on what you do. And that's the way progress is made. So if that's what you mean by failure, yeah, you have to embrace it and maybe see it not as failure. If you mean getting bad grades in classes, that's okay too. I tell people if you major in physics or get a PhD in physics, I think it's par for the course that you're not going to get an A in every class. Like that's okay too. And that can be hard to do. But again, seeing the big picture of progress and how it's slow, and physics is a really tough field, right? It takes years to fully understand things and get them. So to be gentle with yourself and keep that perspective.
Any other panelists want to add? Yeah,
I really like something that Laura said, not tying your identity to the research you do. So, when you apply for fellowships, when you apply to grad school, when you apply for jobs, the number of people applying for a single slot is huge. And just number wise, right? It's extremely difficult to get a yes. And if you have tied your value to getting a yes, then it's going to hurt every time. And so remembering that your value and who you are and what you care about and the things you do are not tied to a yes or a no from someone who, if there are 300 people applying for one spot, like God knows you could have blinked wrong and not gotten the job, right? Don't tie your value to that. And so remembering that, rejection 99.99999% of the time has nothing to do with you and your value is really important. And I probably took far too long to figure that out and to restructure how I thought of myself in the context of the job that I had.
Maybe we'll move on to a pretty explicit question what skills, hard or soft, did you find the most useful, let's say in your current career path that maybe you picked up during PhD or developed during your PhD?
I think the less obvious one, so coding skills are good, math skills are good. Most people who do research in physics and astronomy will pick up some of that. Writing skills. You end up doing a lot of writing through grad school, and you get very good at explaining complicated ideas clearly and concisely. And that's a rare and very marketable skill, it turns out.
Yeah, I think more broadly than just writing is the ability to communicate, right? Because a large portion of your job is also presenting the work that you do, either to a student so they can start working on it with you, to colleagues so that they'll read your papers, conferences, in talks, et cetera. And so the ability to tell the story of your research in a way that's meaningful for non-experts, people, who you might be giving public talks to, and scaling how you explain things, whether it be in writing or verbally, I think is a skill that's often underrated, and that should be more explicitly addressed in grad programs, in my opinion.
I completely agree with both of those. I completely agree with both. I was going to add, I think I'm kind of it's becoming a theme when I'm talking about metacognition, but one piece of the communication puzzle that I think is missing a lot everywhere is expectation setting and setting expectations and making sure that I mean, it also ties into failure too. It's a way of avoiding failure. When you can set expectations. I don't if you don't deliver on something, for example, your draft wasn't due on time, you can beat yourself up over it or try to cram it in. But setting expectations, really transparent communication about what's going on, being able to work with that advisor and telling them to step off because something else came in, like Farah was mentioning. That piece of the communication is really important, and it's hard to build the confidence to be able to speak upwards that way sometimes. Yeah.
Great. So actually maybe changing our target a little bit back to maybe the shoes that our students are currently in. Do you have any advice for prepping for graduate school, something you wish you did to prepare as an undergrad? And basically like any advice or any advice with respect to kind of the differences between undergrad and grad school? Gail, maybe we haven't picked on you for a while.
Yeah, no, Cliff, no worries. I'm sighing because graduate school is a lot. And so I'm trying to think of where do you begin for this very immersive experience that you're about to undertake. And so I'm struggling to find nice, concise advice to give you, but maybe just this understanding that that is what it's going to be. It's going to be a very intense experience. You're going to be very immersed in this. Your work-life balance is going to be thrown out of whack. It's going to be pretty intense in most programs. So what's the best advice? Maybe the only advice I would give is if you're feeling like you do have some kind of deficiency or unprepared, to not be deterred by that, because I think everyone goes to grad school with different skills and different strengths and weaknesses, and that's okay, right? That's the point. Perhaps like if your coding skills are weak, you're insecure about, I think everyone has something like that. So maybe I'll answer the question by saying you're about to be immersed in a program. And so if you do feel that there's something that you're missing that you need to cram on, to maybe consider that you don't.
Any other panelists' advice about that kind of transition into grad school? Okay. Yeah, actually another explicit question, maybe this one's a little bit more targeted towards Phil and Laura, but Farah and Gail, feel free. What, if any, additional training did you complete in order to meet qualifications for your current job? Was there any kind of, in leaving academia, was there what was that transition like? Or were you able to kind of make the transition straight from an academic position to one in industry? Maybe Phil first.
Sure, I'm happy to start. So I didn't go the data scientist route, or I didn't go the machine learning AI research route, which would be the natural landing spots for astronomers going to Microsoft Research. There's also, it's interdisciplinary, there are economists, there's cryptographers, there's social scientists, study social media and stuff. It's all very interdisciplinary. But those are kind of the spots that I see astronomers dropping into. So going into program management, they certainly wanted someone who could read the papers, get the information out of it, be able to communicate that research outwards to executives or other people outside the company. But what I did do was I inadvertently had kind of an internship. There's a software that came out of Microsoft Research that's been open source and is owned by the AAS now, which is called Worldwide Telescope. And I directed that project for about 6 months on a leave of absence from my postdoc at the CFA. And basically that was me learning that project management was kind of a fun thing to do. You get to work with a lot of different people who are with a lot of different backgrounds and kind of towards common goals, which kind of clicked off a lot of the things that I was interested in. And so that was kind of the leverage I used applying to the position that I ended up with. Colleagues, though, would, I'll leave it to Laura, but typically, if you're going to ML or AI, try to do some of that with the data that for your research and become an expert on it so you can talk about it in an interview. But I'll leave the rest to you, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I didn't I didn't do any like Coursera courses or like extra qualifications before I started applying for academic positions, but my research had been very AI coding heavy. So maybe if you feel like yours isn't that way, you could do something like that, and it could certainly help. The thing that I did really explicitly, and actually Northwestern had a ton of resources for this, was figure out how to write a resume instead of a CV. They're very different documents. The way you talk about your skills is very different. So most universities, I think, have some programs to help people do that, in particular postdocs, but certainly grad students and undergrads could take advantage of that as well. But yeah, the natural place for people from physics and astronomy to go is into stats, AI, machine learning, which is all really the same thing. And so if you feel like you're getting close to wanting to transition into industry and you don't have much coding experience, that's an explicit thing that you could, there's tons of online free courses and that sort of thing that you could look into.
Can I just add, from an advisor point of view, tell your advisor. Like, communicate that with them. My most senior grad student, he does not want to stay in academia. He wants to go into the data science AI side of things. And I have changed how I advise him. And I have changed the projects that I put him on to specifically develop skills that he can put on a resume versus a CV. Okay, so, you know, I took him away from kind of the more, you know, nitpicky galaxy formation stuff and put him on developing tools using databases, mining those databases in smart ways. I have sent him to data science boot camps. I have forwarded every, you know, data science opportunity that I could to him that comes across my desk. And if I didn't know that, then I couldn't have done that. And so I think communicating that with an advisor is really important. There will be people out there that don't care, but for the most part, when you tell an advisor, hey, my interests have changed and I'm looking to do this, you can work with them to use what you're doing or use your research to bump up your CV. And there's simple things too, like put your code on GitHub. Make your GitHub public and usable. Do little side projects and hack days that you can put on GitHub. And, you know, an advisor will help you with that and help you. If they don't know how to do it, find the people that do know how to do it and keep their eyes and ears open for those opportunities for you.
Yeah, it's great to hear like the amount of flexibility, both towards tailoring a PhD program towards what you're interested in, what, you know, kind of keeping those doors open was kind of another kind of way that Phil put it earlier in the session. Yeah, this is all really great. So looking at the time, we're just about out. And so I thought I'd want to kind of end with one kind of big picture conclusion question. And so panelists, if you could tell these students one thing to remember from today's session, what do you think would be most helpful? That golden nugget of advice.
I'm not sure this is a golden nugget of advice. First of all, everyone, best of luck. I want to wish everyone, it was so nice being here with you all. But I would say go forward and take who you are with you as you're going forward and never be ashamed of that. And just best of luck going forward. Not a nugget of wisdom, but.
I guess we're following the order. I should go next. Sorry. No, I also want to say this was really fun to be on. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope everyone got a lot out of it. I also don't have a nugget of wisdom. I think you all pick out the parts of this that are most important to you. What I really enjoyed, I would say, was hearing Farah reframe imposter syndrome as it should be, and how conflated that can become. And that was really powerful, and I'm really glad that that was stated, and I hope that gets stated more often and it becomes really obvious as we work to undo these things.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me as well. I also had a good time. It's cool to see the range of things that people can end up doing, and I think that that's important to keep in mind as you go forward, that what you think you want to do now might end up having no bearing on what you actually want to do 5 years from now. So just try to keep your options open, take opportunities as they come to you, and don't feel like it's a failure or a problem if you want to shift gears at any point.
Yeah, I think I just will echo that, right? Do make the choices and the decisions that allow you to be authentically yourself. And if you are authentically yourself, that path will illuminate itself. Doors will close with people that don't allow you to have the boundaries or be who you are. And that's good, right? And that will allow you to find the doors that allow you to be the person, to care about the things that you care about, right? And so that will manifest itself very differently for everyone on this call, you know, but making yourself who you are, what your priorities are, and what's important to you first and foremost in how you intentionally, as Phil said, make the decisions on what you're choosing to spend your time on will naturally lead you to some place that brings you happiness. And the best work comes from happy people.
Folks, this was fantastic. Panelists, we can't thank you enough. If you haven't seen already in the chat, copious thanks from the students gathered here. Really appreciate you all taking the time. Students, thank you for your wonderful questions and your attention today. It's been a joy to kind of share this all, and I think we all learned a lot today. Yeah, thank you very much.